Thank you. Please be seated. We have all 18.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we're on the record again on case CR 22211623, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. We're continuing with evidence this morning. The case in chief still presented by the state. The court notes that we do have all 18 jurors have returned and each have signed their juror affirmations this morning. So if we're ready to continue with evidence, it's cross-examination of Ms. Gibb this morning, who has returned on the witness stand. Is the state ready to proceed and have the jurors brought in
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, we'll continue with that. And as I mentioned to council, we'll discuss as the day moves along what time we might conclude for the day, but we'll see how things are going in terms of length of this witness and the next. So if we'll go ahead and have the jurors brought in at this time, please, Mr. Bailiff.
Four eyes, please. Your Honor, the jury is present and accounted for.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. All right, good morning, everyone. We are on the record on case CR 22211623, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. We're continuing with evidence in the case. Ms. Gibb is on the stand, having been previously sworn yesterday. This is continuing cross-examination. The court notes the presence of all 18 jurors properly seated as well. And the court will also indicate that each of the jurors has completed their juror affirmation for the morning. So thank you all for following the court's continuing admonition and instruction in that regard. With that, if we're ready to continue with cross, you can go ahead and take the podium, Mr. Pryor, and we'll continue.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Before you begin your cross, Mr. Pryor, I'll just inquire of the witness. First, I'll remind you, you are still under oath, Ms. Gibb, and I'll ask, did you review anything about the case or your testimony or discuss your testimony with anyone else since last night when we concluded?
No.
Okay. She indicated no. So with that, Mr. Pryor, if you'd like to continue with cross, you can do that now.
Ms. Gibb, I want to go over just a couple of preliminary matters if we could first to start there, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
The first thing is you never did provide a hair sample to any law enforcement agency in this case. Is that right?
Correct.
You never turned over your phone or was requested to turn over your phone to any law enforcement agency. Is that correct?
Correct.
You were never requested or did turn over any email accounts or social media accounts to law enforcement at their request. Is that correct?
Correct.
You did, however, in 2021, provide a DNA sample to a Rexburg or a Fremont County officer a couple of years after this alleged incident. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about an organization that I think you're affiliated with called Seven Gatherers. Are you familiar with the term Seven Gatherers?
I'm not.
You're not. Okay. Initially, there was some discussion about Chad and Lori. Obviously, we're getting very close during the early parts of January and February of 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And at any time, did they talk about having a plan to spend their lives together?
At some point they did.
Do you recall when that was?
I would say they kind of talked about it in the beginning of the relationship about being part of the head of the 144,000. I would say within a month or two. I'm not sure exactly the day.
Well, I appreciate the religious references, but I was talking more on a personal note that they were planning if when Tammy passed away that they were going to spend their lives together. Did you ever overhear that kind of a discussion?
I guess kind of. Yeah.
And on that note, we previously touched on the fact that Chad and a number of his speaking engagements prior to even knowing Lori Vallow spoke about his, and I want to use the right word, his premonitions, I guess, about Tammy not having a long life. Recall that?
Yes.
And you were present for at least a couple of those, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it was also common knowledge that Chad had openly discussed the fact that he felt his wife was not going to live long, well before he ever met Lori Vallow, right?
Right.
Okay. And in fact, you touched on that when you had one of your text message conversations with Prosecutor Wood. You had mentioned that, do you recall having that discussion?
It's possible, but I don't recall it.
Okay. Is it possible that you told him that Chad made it known to a lot of his close friends that he knew that Tammy wasn't going to live long?
Yes.
Okay. And we don't need to go into that. Okay. Now, at no time did Chad Daybell ever tell you that he intended to do harm to Tammy Daybell, did he?
Correct.
And in fact, at no time did Chad Daybell ever tell you that he intended to do harm to JJ Vallow or Tylee Ryan.
Correct.
Okay. So this plan that they had to spend their lives together would only have occurred if either Chad divorced Tammy Daybell or that if the premonition was accurate and Tammy had passed away, that they would be able to spend their lives together, right?
Yes.
Okay. I want to go back to the discussion in late November when you claim that you got a call from Chad about not wanting to talk to the police, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, to put a little foundation in this, on the weekend of the 19th through the 23rd, you were at Lori Vallow's townhome that night, right?
Are you talking about November?
September of
Oh.
19 through the 23rd, you were at,
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
just putting a little foundation in place. You were at there, and then you were, part of that was to go to a seminar. There were a number of other things as well, right?
Correct.
Okay. So in your eyes, that was the last time that you saw JJ Vallow alive, right?
Correct.
Okay. And did you later come to learn that the prosecutors and the state's allegations are that JJ was murdered at or around the time that you folks were there for that podcast?
I wasn't aware of that.
You've never become aware of that?
I wasn't aware that they were murdered. I knew that the word was missing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And subsequently, you've learned that the allegation is that there's an alleged murder that took place at or around the weekend of the 19th through the 23rd. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, your testimony is that Chad Daybell called you and said, don't talk to the police. Is that what it
Correct.
was on the 19th? And do you remember the date of that?
I remember it was 2 or 3 days before Thanksgiving. So it's in November, whenever the Thanksgiving was.
And would the 25th of November ring a bell possibly?
It's possible.
Okay. Okay. Now, prior to November 23rd, did you have any phone conversations with Lori Vallow giving you a warning that Chad was going to call you?
No.
Okay. But when Chad spoke with you at that time, he did tell you that Lori was going to get a hold of you afterwards, right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, Miss Gibb, isn't it true that on November 25th of 2019, Chad Daybell contacted you and specifically asked you, where is JJ Vallow?
And no.
And yet, during that conversation, he told you that Lori was going to be contacting you, right?
That's right.
And then after that, did Lori contact you?
She did.
And what was the discussion, Miss Gibb?
She told me that the police had come asking for JJ and that she had told them that I had JJ and that I needed to go to a movie called Frozen, take some pictures.
Okay.
Back.
So your denial of the fact that Chad called you, you're denying the fact that Chad Daybell called you on the 25th, seeking out information as to where JJ Vallow is. You're denying that, right?
Yes.
Okay. But yet Lori Vallow calls you back
Mhm.
after Chad Daybell and says, I need you to cover for me and tell the police that you have JJ Vallow, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But Mr. Daybell also during that conversation said, you're going to hear from Lori.
Correct.
Did Lori ever tell you, I told Chad that JJ was with you and go along with this story?
I don't believe so.
Okay. But you don't know for sure, do you?
I can't remember. I can't recall all the words I said to
Oh,
her.
okay. All right. Okay. Fair enough. And then was it that day or was it the next day that the police officers called you?
It was the same day.
Okay. And at that point, you told them that you had JJ Vallow, didn't you?
Not initially, but by the end of the day, yes.
Okay. You basically told them during that day that you had possession of JJ Vallow. Is that right?
I said I had him and then I didn't have him.
Well, no,
That's
we're
the
going to go
words I
one at a
used.
time,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Okay.
At the first opportunity to have discussion with the police and discuss where JJ Vallow was, you told them you had JJ Vallow.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm having some difficulty with the fact that Chad's trying to cover something up. And yet after a phone call from Lori discussing to tell them that you had JJ, you suddenly go along and say, yes, I had JJ Vallow.
Order objection. This is a narrative. I'd ask to strike.
Sustain.
All right. And then at some point subsequent to that point, you decided to tell the police, well, I lied about this because I was having an emotional issue with how to deal with this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how long did it take you for you to have that emotional reflection to go back to the police and tell them, I'm not going along with this lie that Lori and I came up with?
A few weeks.
Objection, Your Honor, misstates the evidence.
Well, it's already been answered by the witness. It's late, overruled.
Okay. A couple of weeks it took you to decide that I better tell the police the truth, right?
Right.
Okay. And then at some point you said that you decided to go and excuse me. You decided to go to the police to let them know what really happened. And that was the 2 weeks later, right?
However many times it was, how many weeks, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And then at some point yesterday, you testified that without talking to any law enforcement, you then took it upon yourself to record the conversation between you and Lori, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, Ms. Gibb, and that occurred on about the 8th of December of 2019. Does that sound correct?
If you're referring to the recording, yes.
Recording, yes. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Do you recall having a call to Ray Hermosillo?
Yes.
Right. And well, your testimony previously was, or yesterday was that you didn't talk to anybody from the police department before you made that call, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, misstates the evidence.
Overruled.
You testified that you did not call or talk to anybody with law enforcement prior to recording that call to Lori Vallow. Is that correct?
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object. This misstates her testimony.
I'll sustain that objection.
Did you have any contact with law enforcement prior to making that recorded call to Chad and Lori?
I wasn't aware of the dates, so I'm not sure exactly when those dates were.
Oh, so are you saying you did talk to law enforcement?
I did.
Oh, prior to it, right?
I'm not sure of the dates.
Okay. Well, would it refresh your recollection that there were 2 calls to the Rexburg police with Ray Hermosillo on the 6th of December and the 7th of December? Does that spark your memory a little bit?
No, I don't recall the dates.
Okay.
It's just your memory, not mine.
Okay. And you don't have any recollection of talking to the police beforehand then, right?
Beforehand, what?
Before you recorded the call to Chad?
I could have, or after, or before. I didn't recall the timing.
Well, isn't it true you testified yesterday that you didn't talk to the police when it was inquired?
Objection, Your Honor, that misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
So you did talk to the police on the 6th and 7th with Ray Hermosillo by phone before you made that phone recording to Chad and Lori, right?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered. She's already said she doesn't recall the dates.
I'll overrule that if she has any additional answer.
Ma'am?
You want to repeat the question, Mr.
Oh.
Pryor?
There was contact with law enforcement before you made that recording, right?
There was contact. I don't recall the time.
Okay. And you don't even recall the date, right?
No.
Okay. All right. Now, during that phone call, I touched on this yesterday a little bit. And Lori's comments on the phone call were, I had to move her somewhere else. You recall that?
Sounds familiar, yes.
I will do whatever the Lord needs me to do.
Right.
I love you so much. I know, and you said, I know you do, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I noticed during the phone call that the majority of the conversation was between you and Lori. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And that the only time Chad got on the phone call is when he was talking about, his premonition about Tammy, and that he feels that someone's trying to jump on him as a result of this issue between you and Lori. Would that be fair?
Objection, Your Honor. The call speaks for itself and that misstates what was in the call.
Sustained.
But you would agree with me that Chad was really not a primary or significant portion of that call, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one of the things I took note of during the phone call was that Lori made the comment, "You more than anyone else knows the truth," when she was talking to you. Do you
Yeah.
recall that?
Yes.
Isn't it true, ma'am, that that was a way for her to hide the fact that, Miss Gibb, you and Lori Vallow know the truth about what happened to JJ Vallow on the 23rd of September, correct?
No.
Okay. How about the 22nd of September, ma'am?
No.
Okay. Isn't it true that Lori was being very vague on that phone call because Chad was there and she didn't want Chad to know that you were going to talk about the murder of JJ Vallow?
I have no idea what her agenda was.
Okay. Now, ma'am, there's been some reference to names, people using different names, Chad, Lori, yourself, and the name James and Elena came up, right?
Yes.
You're familiar with that.
Yes.
Are you also familiar with the fact that that was a novel that Chad was writing about his relationship with Lori Vallow?
Yes.
Okay. So that all of that discussion about James and Elena was Chad using one of his personal experiences, maybe not a proper experience, but an experience about his relationship with Lori, and he assigned names to those two folks, correct?
I wouldn't know his agenda.
Okay. Now, you also had a nickname as well, right?
Yes.
Phoebe?
Yes. That sounds
Okay.
familiar.
You went by Phoebe? It sounds familiar?
Very occasionally she would say that.
Okay.
Yes.
And Judge, this slide I'm about to show comes from Exhibit 7D, which was previously admitted by stipulation of the parties. I can show it to counsel if you'd like. Talk about the Elmo, and I'll try to navigate through that if I can. We'll see how well we do there.
Is this defense exhibit 70?
It is Defense Exhibit 7, Judge, and
Oh,
subsection D.
7. Okay.
7, I'm sorry, 7.
That Elmo has both a light and a zoom in out feature on it, Mr. Pryor.
Warming up, Judge. Perfect. Can I have you stand here for me? Okay. So you previously discussed the fact that you never talked about dark portals or dark lives and things like that, correct?
I didn't go around teaching them to people that I can recall.
Okay, well, this is an email. I'll represent this as an email from Lori Vallow to you, and it says Phoebe. And then you responded with the email below, and I apologize for the print on there, but if you could read from thanks and go down to the bottom to me.
Thanks. I love you so much. I'm going to teach you right now, teaching about discerning and shutting off dark portals.
Now, I will represent to you that that was an email that was put together, and it was from you to Lori Vallow. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that email.
Okay. But in that email, you're talking about teaching people about dark portals. Correct?
It sounds like she said she was going to teach me.
Do we need to look at it again? Judge, could I approach the witness with the exhibit?
If you've got a printed copy, you can have the bailiff take the exhibit to the witness.
Judge, may we approach briefly?
Yes.
Ms. Gibb, have you had a chance to read that?
Yes.
Mr. Bailiff, could I have that returned to me, please?
That exhibit, Mr. Pryor, based on sidebar, we're going to designate Defense Exhibit 7C is what was just published to the jurors and given to the witness.
Now, Ms. Gibb, the date of this email from Lori Vallow to you was dated 7/25 of 2019.
Okay.
Okay. And at that time, you were in the process at about that time, very time, on the way to a mountain retreat camp to teach that in the next few days, right at the time you sent this, correct? Remember that?
No,
You don't remember that?
I don't remember anything about me teaching anybody anything like that.
Okay. So you're denying the fact that you and Ms. Vallow had a conversation and you talked about teaching and shutting off dark spirits or dark portals, right?
Incorrect. She shared that.
Oh, she shared that with you.
No, that text says that she wanted to teach me. It had nothing to do with what I responded to that I can see from that text.
Well, forgive me, but the text says, I'm going to teach right now, teaching about discerning and shutting off dark spirits. So it's your contention then that you're not Phoebe, right?
Well, I gather from that conversation that she was sharing that with me.
Well, I gather from the conversation that you were sharing that with her. So we have a disagreement, don't we?
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Sustained.
So your position is you never talked or taught in any camp. Is that right, about dark portals? Is that what you're
That's
testifying to?
correct.
Okay. Now, you also previously testified that you never discussed dark and light or super dark or different levels of dark and light. Is that right?
I discussed it at times with probably people in the inner circle, but I didn't go around teaching it that I can recall.
I didn't ask about teaching. I said that you had discussions with people about light and dark then, right?
Right.
So that's not a term that's not unfamiliar to you, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So when you say the inner circle, does that include Mike James?
No,
Okay, so you never had a discussion with Mike James about super dark and dark, is that right?
not to my recollection.
Okay. Would it refresh your recollection that on November 12th of 2019, you contacted Lori Vallow complaining about Mike James and someone named Nancy being super dark? Does that refresh your recollection?
I don't recall that.
Okay. And if I were to show that to you, would that help you refresh your recollection?
It doesn't matter to me. Regardless, I just don't recall it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Bailiff, could you provide this to Ms. Gibb? Ma'am, when you're done reading that, would you set that or give that back to the bailiff, please?
Okay.
You give it back to the bailiff, please. Mr. Bailiff, if I may, please. So you saw this. Does this refresh your recollection, Ms. Gibb?
No,
It doesn't.
I don't recall.
Okay. Well, do I need to show it to you again and ask you?
I can read it and I see what it says. I just don't recall that text.
Okay. So you don't recall talking about Mike James and asking for a favor and mentioning that someone named Nancy is super dark, but obviously there was that conversation, right?
According to that text, but I don't recall that text.
Okay. And talking about being violent and bad language.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay. You're not denying that this text exists, are you?
No, I just don't
Okay.
recall it.
You just don't recall talking about super dark. So when you gave your testimony that you never really preached or talked about super dark or super light or anything like that, is that still accurate?
I don't recall talking to people outside of the inner circle about that.
Okay, well, that's Mike James, and you just told me Mike James is not in the inner circle.
He's not.
So that's somebody you were talking to Lori about, and it was based on a discussion about light and dark, right?
Right.
So you did talk outside your inner circle about this, didn't you?
Incorrect.
Incorrect? Well, Mike James isn't in your inner circle.
No.
Mike James is unloading on me and says Nancy is super dark. So are you suggesting that, oh, it was just Mike James saying the super dark and you were just listening? Is that what you're saying?
I don't recall how I felt at that time or what he was saying context. I just have no memory of that. I'm sorry.
Okay, and your lack of memory is
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. These have been asked and answered, and this is a narrative.
This last question was not a question. It was argumentative. It's sustained.
Judge, and I think I'm going to move on. Okay.
Sure.
You mentioned about castings,
Right.
and it's your testimony that prior to meeting Lori Vallow, you never engaged in castings. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. But then when you met Lori Vallow, you started the process of engaging in castings.
Correct.
And you mentioned that as part of castings, physical violence to anyone was never part of the solution there, right?
Correct.
The solution was to engage in castings and pray to have evil spirits leave the body of the people you believe are possessed.
Correct.
Death was never in the equation for castings. Is that right?
I guess they eventually said that they would pass on if the evil spirits would leave.
So is that something that's consistent with your LDS faith?
No.
But you engaged in that conduct, right?
Correct.
Okay. Did anybody force you to engage in that conduct?
No.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We previously talked about you going to Hawaii to visit Lori in 2019. Okay. Did Lori pay for your flight on that trip?
I don't think so. I don't recall.
Don't recall, right? Okay. But Tylee was not there. That would you recall?
Not when I was there.
There were occasions when Lori would pay for people's flights. Do you recall that ever occurring?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you ever have a discussion with Lori about paying for Chad's flight to speak in Arizona?
Doesn't sound familiar.
Okay. I want to go back over the timeline a little bit about the weekend of the 19th through the 23rd. Okay.
Okay.
You arrived in Idaho Falls on the 19th. Is that what you recall?
Yes.
That was a Thursday, right?
Yes.
Okay. Lori picked you up at the airport. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was Alex there as well?
He wasn't in the car. No.
Okay. You also, on that Thursday, in a previous interview with law enforcement, mentioned that you went to a restaurant immediately upon arriving in Idaho Falls on that Thursday.
That's right.
And that restaurant, if I recall, was a Johnny Carino's. Does that ring a bell?
I just know it was an Italian restaurant.
Okay. Okay. At that point, was JJ with you too when you went to Johnny Carino's?
I don't recall seeing him there.
Okay. Do you recall that Lori had hired a babysitter that day?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. And Alex was with you because the JJ was with a babysitter, right?
I believe he met us at the restaurant.
Okay. 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 Then after you were at the restaurant, do you recall that the two of you then went to a Walmart?
I don't recall.
Okay. It's possible you went to a Walmart afterwards, right?
It's possible.
Okay. And then you, after going to Johnny Carino's and going to the Walmart, it was relatively late that night, correct?
I feel like it was in the afternoon.
Okay. Is that what you recall?
Yes.
Okay. But then is it your testimony that the remainder of the day you and Lori spent time together, you didn't see Chad, correct?
I don't recall if Chad came over or not. I just know I was with her.
Okay. And that was Thursday, we're correct?
Yes.
Okay, so then we move on to Friday. Do you recall going to a place called the Gravity Factory on
It's
Friday?
some jump place.
I think that's
Yeah.
what that was,
Yeah, I
right?
do recall going there.
Talked about that with law enforcement, right?
Yes,
I think you called it like a jump house or something like that.
like that.
Do you remember about what time you folks went to the jump house on Friday?
Well, I'm not sure it was Friday, but it was daylight outside.
Okay. Well, we know that it wasn't Thursday because we already discussed Thursday, correct?
I can't say if it was or wasn't. It could, we could have done it on Thursday.
You could have.
Yeah, I don't recall when we actually went.
Okay. So you recall telling law enforcement in an interview that on Friday you went to the jump house or to the Gravity Factory? Do you recall telling law enforcement?
I don't recall the date I shared with them.
Okay. And you don't recall what time you went to the Gravity House or the jump house, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. On the Friday morning, do you recall going anywhere Friday morning?
I just know specific things we did. I just can't always recall exactly what day it was.
And then do you recall that after you had spent amount of time before we get there, the jump house, that wasn't for you and Lori, right?
Correct.
That was for JJ?
Correct.
Okay. And you don't recall the number of hours you spent at the jump house, do you?
I would say it was maybe around 2 hours.
Okay. And my recollection is that was in Idaho Falls, correct?
I don't know where it was.
Oh, you don't remember?
I don't.
Okay. And then after the jump house, you and Lori and JJ oh, by the way, was Alex there too at the jump house with you guys?
I remember he came and went. He brought some pizza, I believe.
Well, you guys went out for pizza, didn't you?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
You didn't bring pizza.
I feel like he brought something in. That's just my memory.
Right.
Yeah.
What happened is you went to the jump house and then isn't it true you afterwards Alex came by and then all of you went out to have a bite to eat for dinner at a pizza place, correct?
I don't recall what day it was, but we did go out for pizza one night.
And then after you went out for pizza, you went back to the townhome, correct?
I don't remember.
Okay, well, you went back because you had to gather your things to go pick up Dave, right?
I didn't have to pick up Dave.
Well, who picked up Dave?
No one.
He drove in?
Yes.
I was under the impression Dave flew in.
No.
Okay. That Dave flew in, that's not correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. And then on Friday evening, the folks in the townhouse that evening were you and Dave,
Correct.
your boyfriend at the time, Lori and Alex,
Yes.
and JJ.
And JJ. And I think Chad was there too.
Oh, how long was Chad there?
I don't recall.
Okay. Is it possible that Chad wasn't there?
It's possible.
Okay. And then do you recall if Alex and your boyfriend at the time were playing Guitar Hero on a video game?
They were playing. I remember watching it. I might have at some point just jumped in a little bit and danced a little bit.
Okay. We don't, that's okay.
Mhm.
But the two of them had spent a considerable amount of time that Friday night playing Guitar Hero, Alex and Dave, correct?
No, I don't believe Dave ever did.
Oh, Dave watched Alex play?
Yes, I guess so.
Okay. And then we go on to Saturday. You got up in the morning and prepared to go to this firm foundation thing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, Do you remember in one of your text messages to Prosecutor Wood that you mentioned that you were there at the Firm Foundation for about 10 hours taking pictures? Do you recall talking to Prosecutor Wood about that?
I don't recall talking to him about that.
Is it possible you spoke to him about that?
It's possible.
Okay. So you were at the Firm Foundation and you said you were there for about 10 hours, correct?
I think I was. I just don't remember.
Okay. And do you recall that it was rather late at night on Saturday when you got done with the Firm Foundation? correct?
Yes, yes.
And you didn't see Chad that night either, did you?
I don't recall seeing him.
Okay, right. So then we go on to Sunday. And you and Dave slept in that morning, correct? Recall that?
I do not recall that.
Okay. Anyway, you woke up late, apparently, and Lori,
Objection, Your Honor, misstates the prior testimony and counsels, it's a narrative.
Sustain.
is it possible you slept in till late Sunday morning?
No,
It's not possible?
I don't sleep in.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And then, do you recall that Lori gave you a haircut that Sunday?
Yes,
Okay, and how long did that take?
a few hours because she colored my hair too.
Okay, so that was Sunday morning, correct?
I think so.
Okay, and do you recall about what time that was?
I don't.
Okay. Sometime in the morning, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then you folks went to have lunch that after she cut your hair, correct?
No, I don't remember that at all.
Okay. Did you stay in the townhouse and bring lunch in?
I don't remember how the food was. I don't remember her having a lot of food. She might have made something. I don't remember.
Okay, but at that point, you hadn't seen Chad Daybell Sunday morning, correct?
No, I saw him Sunday morning.
You did? When was that?
Shortly after we went to this field behind a church building. So sometime in the morning. I felt like it was in the morning. Could have been late morning, but it was sometime.
Do you recall discussing with Lori that after Chad gets out of church Sunday afternoon, we'll go out and look at a piece of property? Do you recall having that conversation with Lori?
I don't recall, but it's possible.
Okay, so is it possible you're just confused about the facts and the time to go visit the land was really early to late afternoon on Sunday?
I felt like her seeing a piece of land that I talked about first, and then going to see that land for sale was second. That's just my memory.
Oh, so you went to see a piece of land with Lori first?
Well, I wouldn't consider it was just this empty field that was behind a church, but it wasn't for any purpose of being purchased.
So you were traveling to the piece of property that you were going to go look with Alex and David, but you were traveling with Lori at that point, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, misstates the testimony, it's a narrative. I'd move to strike.
Overruled.
You were traveling with Lori to go look at the piece of property with the real estate person, correct?
No.
Who were you traveling with?
I don't know who I was traveling with. I think maybe Dave and I were in the truck and we drove over there. I don't remember.
You don't remember. So it's possible that you were traveling with Lori as well, right?
No.
Okay. So you remember you weren't with Lori.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay. But you had mentioned that you and Lori went to see a piece of parcel first.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. And then subsequent to that, you went to look at another piece of property, correct?
Correct.
And then Chad was meeting you at that second piece of parcel, correct?
Correct.
And then do you recall you told in an interview to law enforcement that Chad was still in his church clothes at that point?
Could be.
Okay. Well, do you remember that or not?
I don't remember the conversation.
Okay. So it's possible that you told law enforcement that Chad was in his church clothes in the afternoon when he went out to see the property, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you did see Chad at the property at that point, correct?
Correct.
And that's the one we're really sure about, right?
I'm sure about both of them, but yes, he was at that one.
You're sure? Which is the other one that you're so sure about?
The one that we just talked about, the prior one,
Prior one about what?
the parcel that we went to first.
Okay. Oh, Chad was there too?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then afterwards, you went back to the townhome, correct?
Um, it, I think so, but I don't recall for sure.
Okay. And Chad didn't go with you back to the townhome, did he?
I don't think so.
Okay. And then at that point, you were getting prepared for your podcast that you were going to do that night, right?
We didn't prepare for that till the evening.
Okay. And again, on a Sunday evening, Chad wasn't there for the podcast, correct?
Correct.
And then just to clarify again, after you did the podcast, that was late in the, well, it could have been as late as Saturday or, excuse me, Monday morning, but it was after midnight sometime, right?
I'm not sure if it was after midnight. I just know it was around that time.
Okay. And then and then we'll move on to Monday. On Monday, you departed
Mhm.
and left for to go back home. Is that correct?
No.
What did you do on Monday?
Dave and I drove to Pocatello to see his son.
Okay. And you left at about 9:30.
That sounds about right.
Isn't it true that you and Alex and Dave drove by Chad's property Monday morning?
No.
Okay. Judge, I have nothing else. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pryor. Ms. Blake, you can conduct redirect if you'd like.
No, that's already up there. But it has to be. It's going to be put in. Yeah. Now I got to say. I'll find it. Mr. Bailey.
All right, sorry, Ms. Blake, we are labeling the one that was specifically referenced as 7C and putting a mark on that. I know it's a subpart of a generally admitted exhibit, but 7C is marked for the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to wait.
Yes, we'll get that straightened out. Thank you.
Would you like me to proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
Miss Gibb, we've asked you a lot of stuff from the years of 2018, 2019. Have you done your best to recall the facts?
Yes.
With regard to Lori, we talked about your relationship with her. And at times, I think you indicated you had daily contact,
Right.
and at times it was more sporadic.
Correct.
But this contact with her spanned over a period of time, correct?
Yes.
You were asked if you thought Chad believed that he could see visions. And I think you said yes, that was your understanding.
Yes.
Did Chad ever indicate to you that he had visions?
Well, he shared them publicly, so yes.
So Chad shared that he did have visions.
Yes.
You were asked yesterday about the term vibration.
Yes,
Did Chad and Lori ever use the term vibration?
yes.
How did they use it?
They used it in a way to express their, what they thought their knowledge was about being translated.
And when we talk about that, did your level in translation equate with the vibration number?
Yes.
What did they teach regarding that?
So the higher the number, the closer to the body being in a translation state.
And what did they talk about in relation to a translated state?
Your body would be changed in a way that you wouldn't have to eat or, I don't know, drink, but I don't know, your body's just more, I guess, stronger, powerful.
And you wouldn't need some of the things that, generally speaking, mortals or bodies need to survive. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah.
You were also asked some about light and dark, and you were asked about energy work as well. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that some people may have a glow
Judge, I'm
about
going to
them?
object. It's leading.
Sustain.
Your Honor, and I think, if I may respond.
Well, you can ask another question, but it is redirect, not recross. So that was the leading question.
I guess that's what I wanted to be heard on.
Go ahead.
I think there was some agreement to allow defense to go outside the scope of direct, and I do think questions were asked that opened this avenue.
Judge, could we approach?
That's not necessary. I'll make a ruling. There was some discussion, and to the extent that there was additional cross outside the scope of direct, then it would be appropriate for leading on your redirect, Ms. Blake, on those topics. So I'll after reconsideration, overrule that objection because it was a topic essentially brought up anew in cross. So I will allow some leading, Ms. Blake. So go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would it be fair to say that some people may have a glow about them?
Yes.
And is that a little bit different than the light and dark that Chad and Lori taught?
I think so.
You were asked about your communication with the prosecutors.
Yes,
And you acknowledge you had communication with the prosecutors.
that's right.
Did anything about that communication alter your memory of the events?
I'm not sure what you're saying.
Sorry, did it change what you recall from the events with Chad and Lori, your communication with the prosecutors?
Well, no.
Did you ever personally observe Lori and Chad on the phone together?
Yes,
And were you with Lori when those conversations would happen?
yes.
Were you ever able to overhear some of the conversations?
Just a little bit.
After Lori would get off the phone with Chad, would she ever tell you what they talked about?
Yes,
And when she'd tell you what they talked about, would she share with you things Chad taught or told her?
yes.
And you were asked about in these, whether or not Chad had ever indicated to you that he intended to physically harm Tammy. And I think you said he'd never indicated that.
That's right.
And you also said he never indicated a specific intention to harm Lori's kids. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who was it that would label someone dark or a zombie again?
Chad.
And even, and once someone was labeled a zombie or dark, what was going to happen to their body? As
Um,
Chad and Lori taught it.
If they could cast the evil spirit out, the body would naturally die.
So if someone was dark or a zombie, they were going to die.
Yes. Well, maybe. I mean, not everybody. They knew.
But that was the teaching. If the casting was successful, the body would die.
Right, right.
And JJ was labeled darker zombie.
Yes,
Tammy was labeled darker zombie.
yes,
Charles was labeled darker zombie.
yes,
And Tylee was labeled darker zombie.
yes.
You were asked about that phone call, the recording from December 8th of 2019.
Yes,
And to be clear, did law enforcement ask you to record that?
never.
Do you recall hearing Chad on there telling you that you may be in danger?
Yes,
As Lori talked, did Chad ever jump in and correct her? That you recall?
say that again.
Did Chad ever jump in to correct Lori when you were on that call?
I don't recall that.
And Chad was there with her for the call. We could hear him, correct?
Correct.
And Lori tells you JJ's okay.
Correct.
You were also asked about when Chad called you around Thanksgiving. Do you
Yes.
recall that call in 2019?
Yes.
Do you recall what Chad told you or asked you to do at that time?
He asked me not to pick up the phone when the police would call.
Do you recall asking him if JJ was with Kay?
Yes.
And what was Chad's response?
No. The answer was no.
So Chad knew he wasn't with Kay.
Yes.
When that phone call was placed to you by Chad, did you know JJ was missing at that time?
I, um, I, I guess, no, I didn't.
So when Chad first tells you not to talk to the police, you actually don't know JJ's been reported as missing.
Correct. Yeah.
I have no further questions.
Judge, I have just a couple of items on recross.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Pryor, I'll ask some recross.
And Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes. All right, Mr. Pryor, we discussed the scope of recross. Please keep it on those topics and you can continue. With the microphone, Mr. Pryor, please.
Judge. Ms. Gibb, you talked about the fact that you participated in castings, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And as part of your participation in castings, you knew the intent of what a casting was used for was to rid the body of evil spirits, correct?
Correct.
But then you just testified with the prosecuting attorney that you also knew that at successful completion of the casting, the human body would die. So you knew that when you were doing this castings, that apparently you were ending the life of a human body. Isn't that correct?
I had no idea what really the result would be.
Oh,
That was
okay.
the theory.
Okay. But you just said that the purpose of castings was to, when the prosecutor asked you about that, that it would end the life of a human body, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Misstates the testimony, misstates the prior question from the state.
Sustain. All right, that concludes the recross then. That will conclude the testimony of Ms. Gibb. I believe she's under subpoena from the defense also, but I don't know that there's nothing covered that where I allowed the extended scope of cross. Do you intend to recall her, Mr. Pryor?
Judge, I want to keep her under subpoena at this point because if other issues come up and I need Ms. Gibb to come back, I spoke with the prosecutor about how I can communicate with Ms. Gibb if that need arises. But at this point, I want to keep her under subpoena. I would ask the court to do an admonishment about not allowing her to view anything or talk to anybody about the case. But at this point, the final decision has not been made. And I explained that to the prosecutor, but in the event something comes up that I need to revisit that, I need to have that opportunity.
Very well. Ms. Gibb, that concludes your testimony for now. You may be recalled because you may be recalled and are under subpoena from the defense. I'll request and admonish you, not request, but you're admonished not to watch further trial proceedings that may be available on the live stream or to follow the case in any way until such time as you're released from the subpoena. Okay. All right.
Judge, could I also inquire that Ms. Gibb be advised about discussing her testimony or testimony with anybody else?
That's part of the admonishment. So
You, Judge.
that will conclude the testimony of Ms. Gibb. We're going to take a mid-morning recess and discuss scheduling as well as take up one issue outside the presence of the jurors. So at this time, we will break for our mid-morning recess and rise for the jurors, and I'll have counsel stay while we address that issue.
All right.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. You can go ahead and sit down. All right, Ms. Blake, I understand the state was interested in putting an objection on the record relating to the manner in which recross is being permitted.
Yes, Your Honor. We had asked to approach in a sidebar about that. At this juncture, Mr. Pryor has been allowed to do a recross on almost every one of the state's witnesses, and I think it's extending beyond any new matters that may come up. So we're just objecting to the generality of him getting to recross and would request that it be limited to only if a new issue arises, so that we don't end up in a situation where then the state asks to do another redirect and go down that.
And if I could respond, Judge Mead.
You may.
And quite frankly, Judge, it's not the prosecutor's prerogative, or is it their decision to decide when I get a recross? That's the judge's decision to make. So I don't know where Ms. Gibbs thinks she has the authority or the ability to say when.
Ms. Blake.
Ms. Miss Blake is what I said, Judge, I think. I did say Miss Blake, did I not?
Said Ms. Gibbs.
Miss Gibbs. I apologize.
Go ahead.
Miss Blake has the ability to dictate when this court makes its own independent decision, when I'm permitted to have recross.
All right, well, evidentiary rulings and the way witnesses are examined are subject to rules as well as the court's discretion. Certainly, the state can lodge an objection, and I'll pay attention to that. There is limitations on what is supposed to be allowed in the scope of redirect or recross. Part of the reason the court has been pretty liberal in allowing that is sort of a, I understood, standing agreement between the parties that with certain witnesses, instead of calling them twice, once in the defense or in the state's case, again in the defense case, for efficiency purposes, getting them on the stand once. I permitted extensive, on some witnesses, scope of cross beyond direct. If we are not going outside the scope as part of that agreement, then I would agree that it's not proper to allow recross every time. So I'll just watch for the topics that come up. And if we extend on cross beyond the scope and that's allowed, then that's where I think there's a second opportunity. So both sides essentially get a right to direct and cross a witness. So I'll just take that under advisement for future rulings. Any questions on that ruling, Ms. Blake?
Thank you, Your Honor. And the state does recognize it's clearly within the court's discretion. If we do have concerns in the future about a request for recross, would the court just like us to approach and then discuss that?
I just don't think those are prejudicial for the jurors, and approaching slows things down. So just
So
go
just
ahead and
make the objection?
just make an objection, I think, unless it's related to some specific topic that may prejudice the jurors. Let's just move it along with.
And the state does agree that recross may absolutely be appropriate. It just seems that it is at times just rehashing the same stuff.
Very well.
you.
It'll be under advisement for future rulings. We'll take our rest of our recess at this time. And I do want to just briefly discuss the remaining schedule for today with council right now on a sidebar, and then we'll take our break.
All rise.
Please be seated. All right, let's go ahead and have the jurors return, please.
All rise, please. Present and accountable for.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we're back from the mid-morning break. We're going to go ahead and continue with evidence this morning on the state's case in chief. I believe there's another witness the state's prepared to call. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor. The state will call Doug Hart.
Very well. You can call your witness.
solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. You're sitting close enough and speak directly into the mic, please. Okay, you guys, much water and.
All right, Mr. Hart, do you go by agent or officer or some other title you prefer?
Agent Hart is fine. It's former, but whatever works.
Okay, well, we'll just call you Agent Hart then. Before we get started with your testimony, now that you've been placed under oath, I just want to ask you, because the proceedings are being live streamed and available for public access, have you reviewed or watched or observed any of the trial testimony in this case since it began?
No, I have not, Your Honor.
All right, and have you discussed with anyone else their testimony that has testified in the case?
No, I have not.
Okay, thank you for that affirmation. Ms. Blake, you can inquire on direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please spell your name for the record?
Douglas Hart, H-A-R-T.
Where are you currently employed?
I am currently the Chief Deputy at the Canyon County Sheriff's Office
How long have you been employed with them?
since September of 2022.
What did you do prior to taking that position?
Prior to that position, I was a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation for approximately 27 years.
Did you hold various assignments or have specific roles you played within the special agent?
Yes, I did.
And what were some of those?
My first assignment was to the Honolulu, Hawaii field office, where I spent 5.5 years on the organized crime drug squad, conducting complex multi-subject investigations. My second assignment was to the Lewiston, Idaho resident agency, where I spent 7 years working primarily violent crime and persons crimes on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. My third assignment was to be the supervisor of the Treasure Valley Metro Violent Crime Task Force, which is a local task force headed by the FBI to investigate gangs and violent crimes. And my final assignment, my last 7 years in the FBI, I was the supervisor for the southern 34 counties in Idaho for all criminal programs. And it was in that capacity that I became involved in this investigation.
And you just mentioned becoming involved in this investigation. Can you tell me a little bit about how the FBI ended up involved in this case?
Certainly. This case was brought to our attention in November, towards the end of November of 2019. And because it involved 2 missing children, that is something that the FBI has a specific expertise in. And it's something that we work very closely and cooperatively with our state and city and county partners in investigations involving missing children.
And when you became involved, or when the FBI became involved, is it fair to say that it became a joint investigation?
Yes.
Do you recall which agencies were involved?
Yes. We were initially contacted by the Rexburg Police Department and the Fremont County Sheriff's Department, or Sheriff's Office, excuse me. And then subsequently, for a brief period of time, the State of Idaho Attorney General's Office, and I think and Social Security and a few other entities had smaller parts of the investigation that they worked on.
And as part of your involvement in this investigation, did you take on specific tasks?
I did.
What were some of those?
First and foremost, I was the FBI supervisor in this case, which meant that I was the reviewer and approver of most of the FBI work product that went into our case file. And then I also had an investigative role due to our minimal staffing in eastern Idaho and some transfers that had taken place, which further diminished our staffing. I carried several investigative assignments within this case.
Do you recall, as part of your assignments in this case, looking into some iCloud accounts?
Yes, I did.
Do you know who those iCloud accounts were associated with?
Yes, they were associated with Lori Vallow.
And do you recall the names on those accounts?
Yes, there were 2 accounts. The first account was called Lori 4 Style with the number 4. And the second account was called Lolly Time.
And when you looked at these iCloud accounts, could you tell how long they'd been in existence?
Yes.
And what did you learn regarding that?
So the first account, Lori for Style, was the oldest account. It was the bulk of that account started in 2016, but there were some materials that were present there as early as 2011, 2012. And then Lolly Time was more recent. It essentially started July 1st of 2019.
And when you were reviewing these Could you tell if some messages had been deleted? What exactly were you able to see in relation to any messages or the content there?
So the content on both iCloud accounts is extremely voluminous. We utilized a software system called Cellbrite, which doesn't change any of the data within the iCloud, but organizes it in a way that makes it reviewable. For instance, there will be a section for SMS or text messages, a section for videos and photographs and contacts and Bluetooth and on and on and on. And so this software just takes the mirrored image of the iCloud account and organizes it into its component parts. And so I reviewed all of those component parts for both of the iCloud accounts.
And you mentioned that both of these accounts had voluminous information on them.
Yes.
And in preparation for your testimony today, did you create a summary exhibit?
I did.
And does the summary exhibit contain some content from Lolly Time?
The summary exhibit for today is almost exclusively from Lolly Time, with the exception of one slide, which is from Lori for Style.
And do you believe that this would assist and aid you in your testimony today?
Yes, it would.
Do you believe it would aid the jurors in understanding the evidence?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I have what's been marked as State's Exhibit 183. I have provided a copy to counsel. I have a copy for the court, as well as a courtesy copy for Your Honor. As some of the other exhibits for the state, this will actually be, the actual exhibit will be a jump drive containing the PowerPoint, but we have the slides printed off for courtesy.
Okay.
And if I can have the witness shown a copy?
Yes. Could you turn your microphone on, please, Mr. Pryor?
Even with a note. Judge, my only objection is I would like the officer, it was agent, I'm sorry, the officer, deputy,
Deputy.
that's acceptable, to just make note of the range that this summary encompasses, if we could, date, ending date, beginning date.
Certainly, the begin.
This is just part of the admissibility here. Ms. Blake, the witness is being handed that. It sounds like provisionally there's no objection, but if we could identify, and it'll be helpful for the record too, just the date that this encompasses. Date range.
Yes. Agent, are you able to tell us the date range that this would cover?
This exhibit covers a date range of January 2019 through, I believe it is August of 2019.
And is there a reason that that is what the time frame within this exhibit?
Yes, the pertinent portions of the iCloud for today's testimony exist within that specific time frame.
And through the investigation, did you learn when Chad and Lori first met?
Yes,
What did you learn in relation to that?
they met on October 26th, 2018.
And so this exhibit would begin several months after their first meeting?
Yes, it does. There are communications that reference the time frame of their meeting in 2018, but those communications are dated July of 2019.
And through the investigation, did you learn the last known day that Tylee Ryan was seen?
Yes.
And what was that day?
The last known date that Tylee Ryan was seen was September 8th of 2019.
Did you learn the last day JJ Vallow was seen?
Yes, the last day that JJ Vallow was seen was September 22nd of 2019.
And did you also learn the day that Tammy Daybell was declared dead?
Yes, Tammy Daybell was declared dead on October 19th of 2019.
Through the investigation, did you learn when Chad and Lori got married?
Yes, they were married in Hawaii on November 5th of 2019.
And when you became involved in the investigation initially, JJ and Tylee were still missing, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, it's my understanding then the exhibit would be stipulated to?
All right, with those dates determined, Mr. Pryor, any objection?
Judge, it's not stipulated to, but there is no objection to the exhibit.
Okay, well then, without objection, State's Exhibit 183 is admitted. The court noting the actual exhibit will be the PowerPoint presentation file on a digital drive. The court has a courtesy copy as well as counsel, and the witness is referring to printed versions that are derived from that PowerPoint presentation.
And Your Honor, I guess just to ensure the record is clear as well, the iCloud accounts have been stipulated to that this content's pulled from.
Okay, and I will note that as well. Thank you.
And that is correct, Judge. These have been stipulated as part of the record.
Okay,
And Your Honor, with that, the state would ask permission to publish.
yes, you may publish.
Agent Hart, when you created this exhibit, did you pull over the content from these iCloud accounts?
I did.
So do some of these contain potential spelling errors, things of that nature?
Yes, most of what we'll see today are text messages. And so the Cellbrite software arranges them in a reverse chronological order and assigns each text message a line number. Associated with that is a date and a time for the text, and then who it was to or from, and then the actual content of the text. And so I cut and pasted the content of the text exactly as it appears in the iCloud account.
Thank you. And with that, would you go ahead and read these messages into the record?
Yes. This sheet is from the SMS section of Lori for Style at iCloud.com. Line number 2585, January 23rd, 2019, 5:18 p.m. Text from Lori Vallow to Audrey Baratario. Hi, Audrey. This is Lori. I would love to talk to you sometime. Text me or call me. I'm excited to be able to talk to you about what we both know. Line number 2584.
Judge, could we approach?
Yes. All right, Ms. Blake, if you'd like to continue with direct, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Hart, if you could go ahead and continue reading those into the record.
Yes. Line number 2584, January.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point on the basis that this is cumulative. There's a record that's already been established with the exhibit. And to just require the officer to read the remainder is cumulative in my opinion.
All right, response from the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state's position is it is not cumulative. While the state recognizes it is an exhibit, it's also a summary exhibit that we heard testimony from the agent that this would aid in his testimony today, that he believes it would aid the jurors in understanding. While it is what's on the screen, so long as it's read as to what's appearing on the screen, the state's position is in no way is this cumulative evidence. So we would ask that the judge overrule that objection and allow us to move forward with testimony.
And Judge, briefly in response is that the exhibit is what it is, and it's clear for the jury to look at that and read that. It doesn't necessitate the prosecutor to go line by line over a massive exhibit.
I am going to sustain the objection in that I would find it be somewhat, well, it is cumulative to have a written version of all of the messages and then to simply have a witness read through all of the written messages when they're already being published and the jurors are all capable of reading them as well. I'll sustain that in that I just don't want to have the entire thing read into the record. I don't know that that's necessary, but if you want to have any time or assurance to make sure the jurors have read the messages and direct the witness to any of the specific messages that are contained in there, certainly you can go there, Ms. Blake, but just the wholesale reading of all the messages, I do find the objection is sustained.
Agent Hart, when we look at these messages, looking at the first one there, it appears to be a message from Lori sent to Audrey.
That's correct.
Can you tell us who, if you learned through the investigation, who Audrey Baratario is?
Audrey Baratario was a friend and associate of Chad Daybell.
And did you learn through the investigation how she came to be in contact with Lori?
Chad Daybell introduced her to Lori Vallow.
And when we look at that first message, is there something about that that initially caught your attention?
Yes, it's the line where Lori indicates to Audrey that she's excited to be able to talk about what we both know.
And then did you look at that in conjunction with the response from Audrey to Lori?
Yes, Audrey indicates that states that she guesses Lori has talked to Chad. And so it's clear from this particular text string that there's a reference by Lori Vallow to Audrey Baratario about what Lori, Audrey, and Chad Daybell know.
And Your Honor, may I ask that the witness be handed a laser pointer if we have one available?
Yes, I do think we have one.
Thank you. And Agent Hart, if at any point that's helpful.
Okay.
That. And then was there some significance to these other messages in relation to those first messages?
Yes, mainly in the fourth line where it says by Lori to Audrey that she thinks it's fun to talk to someone who knows what's really going on. Again, a reference to something between the three of them.
And again, this was in January of 2019.
Correct.
If we move to the next slide, I'm going to pause to give the jurors a chance to look through that.
Yes.
And Agent Hart, when we look at these messages, we have the name Melanie Boudreau. Did you learn through the investigation who she is?
Yes, she is Lori Vallow's niece.
And there's a reference in that first email to someone named Brandon. Do you know who Brandon is?
Yes, these are text messages, not emails, but Brandon is Melanie's husband or soon to be ex-husband. They were in the process of separating and getting a divorce.
And there's also the name Al. Do you know who Al would be referencing?
Only by the content of the text. I have never met or spoken with Allie Bloomer or her husband.
And what caught your attention about these particular messages?
These messages and then the next two slides are a continuation of this text string, demonstrate several significant things that are relevant to this investigation.
And in that, in the very last message, it appears to be a message from Chad to Lori.
Correct.
And what did that appear to be an indication Chad was going to do?
So during the investigation,
Objection, Judge. That was going to call for speculation.
Overruled.
during the investigation, we came to know that Chad Daybell purported to have the ability to assign an individual as being either dark or light, and he would give them a score. And Lori Vallow and others would seek Chad's visions as it related to assigning people as being either dark or light. And so this is one of the first references we see in the iCloud account where Lori Vallow is seeking from Chad Daybell, or Chad Daybell rather, offers that he will check Allie Bloomer and her husband, meaning he will see what their scores are.
And then looking at that first message, it references that Brandon is making me promise not to have you or Al around my house or kids. Do you know who that Al is?
Yes, that's Alex Cox, Lori's brother.
And then you had already indicated this next slide is a continuation. I'm just going to pause to give the jurors a chance to read through that. And when you looked at these messages, was there anything on these that stood out to you?
Yes, primarily in line 3000, where Chad Daybell responds back approximately 8 minutes later, giving Lori Vallow these scores. He assigns Allie Bloomer as being 4.1 dark, and her cop husband is a 3 dark. And so those are coming from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow in reference to this issue that's come up with Melanie Boudreau.
And if we look at the line 2996, is Lori passing that information along?
Yes, and this is a pattern that we see repeatedly, that Lori Vallow would solicit Chad Daybell's advice or visions. Chad Daybell would respond, and then Lori Vallow would disseminate that out to whoever was making that inquiry.
And if we move to the next slide, I believe you indicated this is also a continuation of that conversation.
Correct.
I'm just going to pause here to give the jurors a moment to look through that.
Yes.
When we look at these messages, if we start with the new one, there's a reference to checking for recording devices. Did anything about that catch your attention?
Yes,
And then did it catch your attention in reference to the following messages?
it
Or is it
did.
related?
It did. So subsequent to seeking those scores on Allie Bloomer and her husband, Lori Vallow then makes a request to Chad Daybell to clear Melanie Boudreau's house and also check it for recording devices. And so Chad Daybell responds that he'll do that and that he's having to break down some dark entries Brandon created and that he detects 3 listening devices. And that answer is then passed on directly from Lori Vallow to Melanie Boudreau, referencing Chad Daybell as Melanie Boudreau's father, and then verbatim passes on that message. So to me, this establishes once again,
Judge, I'm going to object. It's calling for speculation.
I'll overrule that. You can answer.
it establishes that the individuals within this group look to Chad Daybell as the supposed visionary who will give them these types of information.
And in these messages, when the request is made, Chad responds. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm turning to the next slide. I'm again going to pause to allow the jurors a moment to look through that.
Very well.
Agent Hart, when we look at the date on this message, can you read the date?
I can, July 13th of 2019.
Do you know when Charles Vallow was killed?
He was killed on July 11th of 2019.
So just 2 days prior to this message.
Correct.
During this time, was Tammy Daybell still alive?
Yes.
Do you know who Adam, Leah, well, I'll stop there. Do you know who Adam is?
Yes.
And who is that?
Chad Daybell's son-in-law.
And do you know who Leah is?
Chad Daybell's daughter.
And do you know who Joe is?
Joe is also Chad Daybell's son-in-law.
What is it, outside of the date, what else about this message drew your attention?
There were a couple of things that I think are significant in this message. The first is this line where Chad Daybell says, "I feel she will be gone by then," which is a reference to the pending death of Tammy Daybell.
Judge, objection. That calls for speculation.
I'll strike that last part of the answers,
you.
insufficient foundation.
Based on your investigation, who did you believe the she to be?
Tammy Daybell.
It calls for speculation. I'll renew my objection, Judge.
And Your Honor, I think based on his investigation, I'm asking who he believed this message to be
Judge, could we
referencing.
approach, please?
No, it's overruled, Mr. Pryor. Go ahead, Ms. Blake.
Who did you believe the her to be?
Tammy Daybell.
Or I said her, but the word is actually she, the pronoun used, correct?
Correct.
Looking at the second to the last sentence, could you explain if there was anything about that that drew your attention?
Yes, it helps tie in the line, "I feel she will be gone by then," So Chad Daybell tells Lori Vallow that the Lord has hinted to him that he might not get to be with Lori Vallow until after this graduation ceremony takes place on July 23rd, and asks Lori Vallow to, quote, please ask about that.
If we turn to the next slide, again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read that. Agent Hart, looking at the date on this one, how many days ago had Charles been killed?
3 days prior.
And again, Tammy Daybell's still alive?
Yes.
Do you know, or did you learn through the investigation who Lily would be referencing?
Yes. Lily is another name for Lori Vallow.
Was there something about this that caught your attention?
There are two things about this communication that caught my attention.
Could you tell me what those were?
The first is the reference to joining Chad Daybell in the shower. They were physically, Lori Vallow was in Arizona, Chad Daybell was in Idaho at the time of this message. So there are repeated references to Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell having the ability to connect on a spiritual plane and be together spiritually. So this is just one example of that, but it's pertinent because it happens repeatedly and it could be easily confused that they were actually physically present together, which they were not. So that was the first thing that stood out.
And what was the next thing?
The next thing is the last line of Chad Daybell's text to Lori Vallow, where he says he loves her so immensely that the whole universe knows it, and very soon the people on this little blue globe will know it too, which demonstrates that their relationship was clandestine or secret at this point, and that at some future date, the relationship between Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow would be divulged by Chad Daybell.
And then moving to the next slide, again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors time to read that. Agent Hart, when we look at these messages, there is the name James and a name Elena referenced. Did you see those in this message?
Yes.
Were you able to determine through the investigation who James is referencing?
Yes, James is Chad Daybell.
And were you able to determine who Elena is referencing?
Yes, Elena is Lori Vallow.
And again, the date on these messages is how many days after Charles Vallow was killed?
This is now 3 days after he was killed.
What is it about these particular messages that drew your attention?
Well, the James and Elena communications are very significant, and we see them first in the email section of the iCloud, starting on July 8th, continuing through July 9th, and through much of July. Chad Daybell is the author of these portions of a narrative or a history that chronicles Chad Daybell's meeting Lori Vallow and how their relationship developed. He refers to himself as James in this and to Lori Vallow as Elena, but in fact, this is autobiographical. It is based in fact. We verified the facts of the story as being correct and accurate to real events. And so in this, we have a description from Chad Daybell as to how he met Lori, and particularly several important events that occurred early on in their relationship.
And in this first one, there's an indication now on with the story. Were there other segments that came before this next message?
Yes, and it's very voluminous. And so what we're seeing here were portions that were sent via text message by Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow. But as I said, on July 8th is the first instance we see of a very lengthy narrative written by Chad Daybell, sent to Lori Vallow via email.
And again, during this time, Tammy Daybell is still alive?
She is.
In that second message, there's the indication they would both attend the same event in mid-November. Were you able to determine through the investigation if that occurred?
Yes, so that's a reference to November 15th through the 17th of 2018. So while this message was sent via text on July 14th of 2019, the narrative contained in the message is talking about a time period between the end of October and prior to November 15th through the 17th of 2018.
And the last sentence of that text, was there something that stood out there?
I think the entire text is pertinent, as well as that last sentence. In the middle, Chad Daybell states in this narrative that he and Lori Vallow had been married before, and references some past time with the Savior when he lived in Jerusalem. And Elena, or Lori, had been his beloved spouse and best friend. In the final line, he says that relationship was now meant to continue in this lifetime. So looking at this history, Chad is saying that after he met Lori Vallow, he knew that their relationship was now meant to continue in this lifetime, with the assertion that they had been married in a previous lifetime.
And again, you talked about, while this message is sent in July of 2019, that it's referencing events from 2018.
That's correct. Chad Daybell met Lori Vallow on October 26th of 2018 at a Preparing a People conference in St. George, Utah. That's chronicled in this history. In between their first meeting, there was a 3-week time period before they would physically meet again in Mesa, Arizona, November 15th through the 17th, 2018, at another Preparing a People conference. So the time period being referenced by Chad Daybell in this communication is that time period from the end of October 2018 until they meet again physically in November of 2018.
And when this is written, Charles and Tammy are still alive.
That is correct.
We go to the next one. And again, I'm going to pause here to let the jurors read it. And this message again has the date of July 14th of 2019, correct?
Yes, it does.
And could you talk a little bit about what it is about this message that caught your attention?
What caught my attention is that this is the first time Chad Daybell introduces to Lori Vallow the concept that they had lived as human beings at another time in the past, that they had been married to each other in the past, and that they were meant to be married again in this present time and complete these important missions together.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point, and I have voir dire native objection.
Well, there's no pending question at this time, so if there was an objection, Mr. Pryor, it just wasn't timely.
And again, Agent Hart, when we're seeing the James and Elena references and this story being drafted, it is referencing back to events that would have happened previously.
Yes, he is referencing events and phone conversations that took place between the end of October 2018 and just prior to November 15th through the 17th of 2018.
And again, when we're looking at this, Charles has been killed just 3 days before this message.
That's correct.
And in 2018, when this story's referencing back to 2018, Charles and Tammy were still alive.
Yes, Charles and Tammy were still alive. Lori Vallow was married to Charles Vallow, and Chad Daybell was married to Tammy Daybell during this time period that he's describing.
Judge, I'm going to object on response, or I'll actually, Judge, I'll withdraw at this point.
All right. Go ahead, Ms. Blake.
There's also a reference in there, the line starting with, "He was ecstatic." Could you read that sentence in there?
He was ecstatic that she was receiving confirmation of these things as well.
Did that indicate anything to you?
Yes, in the first sentence, Chad writes that he tried to delicately describe their connection with one another and was in fact delighted when Lori Vallow believed him. And so this is Chad Daybell introducing these concepts of he and Lori having been married in a previous life.
And then later on, we see that she appeared to be getting confirmation of what Chad was telling her.
Correct.
There's also reference in there to physical desires.
Yes.
With the talk of physical desires, making love, was there anything about those that caught your attention?
Well, it demonstrated the attraction of Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow instantly upon their meeting in October of 2018.
If we move to the next slide, and again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read this. When we look at these messages, they are also dated July 14th of 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was it about these messages that caught your attention?
This is a communication by Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow, seeking an opportunity to be with her in person and using a camp out and a potential speaking assignment as a ruse to be able to leave Rexburg and go and be with Lori Vallow.
And there's a reference there in the first message, whether she is still here or not. Based on your investigation, did you determine who that she would have been referencing?
Tammy Daybell.
And in the James and Elena, we saw some reference to some kind of physical attraction. And then in these, what stood out is Chad and Lori are actually going to meet up in person here.
Yes, the investigation had revealed they had already met at several different times with travel to different places to be together for periods of 2 or 3 days. And in fact, we were able to verify that Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow did meet and were together during that July 24th through 26th timeframe that's referenced in the communication.
And July 24th to 26th, Tammy Daybell was still alive. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then if we go to the next slide, and again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read this. And again, these are a continuation of text messages from July 14th of 2019.
Correct.
And again, just 3 days after Charles Vallow's been killed.
Yes.
What about these messages drew your attention?
There was a lot of what we call sexting content in the iCloud that I examined. I included these communications as just a very, very small example that this was in fact a sexual affair. It was not an emotional affair or a spiritual affair. It's very clear that it's a physical sexual affair between Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
And moving to the next slide, again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read this. And if we look at these, can you indicate the date on these messages for the record?
July 15th of 2019.
So these are moving to the next day from the previous messages.
Correct.
What is it about these particular messages that caught your attention?
This is an example of how Lori Vallow sought to manipulate Chad Daybell in the immediate aftermath of Charles Vallow's death.
And in that text from Chad to Lori, could you read the last line?
He says, "You are my wonderful best friend that I can't live without."
And again, during this time, Tammy Daybell is still alive.
Correct.
And the manipulation that you're indicating is Lori's response there. Could you read the first line?
Yes, she replies, and yet you are so sad, missing you.
Referencing back to his message to her that he couldn't live without her.
Correct. Chad Daybell tells Lori Vallow how much he loves her and he can't live without her. And her response to that is, and yet you are, in fact, living without me. So sad.
And moving to the next slide, again, I will pause to allow the jurors to read. And could you indicate the date on these messages for the record?
July 18th of 2019.
What about these messages stood out to you?
Well, this is a series of texts that occupies this slide and the next 3 slides, all regarding the same subject, and that is Lori Vallow has just found out that she is not the beneficiary to Charles Vallow's $1 million life insurance policy.
And she's telling Chad that.
Correct.
Going to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And you indicated this is a continuation of the previous slide, correct?
Correct, as well as the next 2 slides.
In looking at this particular slide, there's a reference to bringing down the Gadiantons, especially Brandon.
Yes.
Through the investigation, did you determine who that Brandon would be that is being referenced?
That is Brandon Boudreau, Melanie Boudreau's soon-to-be ex-husband.
Through your investigation, did you learn anything in relation to Brandon and an investigation involving him?
Yes.
What did you learn?
What could you clarify? What did we learn about?
Yes, sorry. Did you learn anything about an incident being investigated by the Gilbert Police Department involving Brandon as a victim?
Yes.
And what did you learn regarding that?
On November 2nd of 2019, as Brandon Boudreau was pulling in his driveway of his home in Arizona, an individual shot at him with a rifle, narrowly missing him.
And you said November 2nd. Is it possible it was October 2nd?
I'm sorry, you are correct. It is October 2nd. Excuse me.
And that was October 2nd of 2019.
Correct.
Do you know, did the reference bringing down the Gadiantons mean anything, or did you learn what that was referencing?
I learned that that is a reference. The name Gadianton has to do with a group of people that's referenced in a book of scripture called the Book of Mormon. The Gadiantons were robbers and thieves, and so the word Gadianton is indicative of someone who is a thief or a robber or a bad individual.
And as Lori's telling Chad that she's no longer the beneficiary, can you read the last text into the record?
Yes, that's a text from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow. It says, it will be interesting if it got changed after he had 2 bullets in his chest.
And going to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, I think you indicated this is also a continuation from the previous 2 slides. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Were there some additional references on this particular slide that stood out to you, or particular statements?
Yes, primarily the last line.
And what was it about that that stood out to you?
That's a text from Lori Vallow to Chad Daybell. And so she had found out that the beneficiary for the life insurance policy had been changed in March of 2019. And then she says, so it was probably Ned before we got rid of him. Ned is the name of the supposed dark entity that Chad Daybell had assigned to Charles Vallow.
And then there's a reference there before we got rid of him, correct?
Correct.
Did you learn what the 4,000 a month from SS was in reference to through the investigation?
Yes, that's a reference to money that would still be coming to Lori Vallow through Social Security for her children, primarily for JJ.
And then if we move to the next slide, again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read.
Very well.
And when we look at this slide, can you read the date on these messages into the record?
Yes, these 5 messages are all from July 21st of 2019.
We've talked about who Ned is. Through the investigation, did you learn who Rhonda is that's being referenced?
Yes, Rhonda is the name assigned to the dark spirit or dark entity that Chad Daybell assigned to Kay Woodcock.
Judge, I'm in object on foundation.
Sustained.
Agent Hart, as part of your investigation, did you review other documents?
Many, yes,
Did you review other reports?
yes,
Did you discuss this matter with other investigators?
yes,
And based on your review in this case, did you determine who Rhonda was referencing
yes.
and who was
And I'm
that?
going to renew my objection, Judge. You can talk about all the reports you want, but unless they get into specifics, telling me how he came to that conclusion, which documents, when, where, and time, it's still not sufficient foundation.
For purposes of this direct, I do find there's sufficient foundation. I'll overrule the objection. You can cross on that, of course, Mr. Pryor, when it's your chance for cross-examination.
Who did you determine Rhonda to be referencing?
Kay Woodcock, who is Charles Vallow's sister.
Now, there's references in some of these messages as well to working on someone. Through your review of the iCloud and messages, did you determine anything in relation to those working on, or did that stand out to you?
Yes, this is a phrase that we see repeatedly in the iCloud, and it actually has a dual meaning. When they're referencing somebody who Chad Daybell has determined to have a dark spirit or a dark entity working on them has a negative connotation. When it's someone who's determined to be light or good, then working on them is an uplifting or a building connotation.
Agent Hart, as we've reviewed some of these messages that were around or shortly after Charles' death, we're seeing some of them. In your review of the messages, did you ever see any signs of grief or sorrow from Lori Vallow?
No,
Did you ever see any signs of grief or sorrow from Chad Daybell?
none.
If we go to the next slide, again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And would you read the date of this message into the record?
July 21st of 2019.
And we've talked about James and Elena before, and this story, again, it references a prior period of time than when the message was being sent. Is that correct?
Yes, so at this point in this narrative, the dates are, this would be November 15th of 2018.
And we saw a previous slide dealing with that same time frame. Is that correct?
The previous slides were actually talking about that period of time between the end of October and prior to November 15th of 2018. This particular story talks about when Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow are now physically together in Mesa, Arizona on November 15th of 2018.
And through the investigation, did you learn if Chad Daybell was in fact in Arizona in November of 2018?
Yes, we verified that he was present on that specific date. We verified that he spoke at a Preparing a People conference there during those dates of the 15th through the 17th of November 2018, and verified that he was physically present at other locations as well.
And outside of the continuation of the James and Elena, were there specific things in this message that drew your attention?
Yes.
What were those?
Primarily that there was a plan that had been revealed or communicated to Chad that wasn't entirely clear to him yet, but it included them, meaning Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, being together at the present time.
So specifically, the plan was being revealed to Chad.
Correct.
And there's a reference of Chad and Lori having a mission together.
Yes.
And moving to the next slide, I'm again going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, these messages were also sent on July 21st of 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
In looking at these particular messages, was there anything that stood out to you?
Yes, they're very insightful in that Chad, in his own words, is explaining the feelings he had for Lori Vallow within 3 weeks of meeting her, that they had progressed through this relationship. They had finally found their best friend that they could trust and confide in.
And again, the period of time this message is referencing, both Lori and Chad were married to other people.
Correct.
And Lori Vallow responded to this message. Can you read her response?
She loves it.
And there's the reference in there to the 3 weeks. And would this have been, was the meeting in November about 3 weeks after Chad and Lori met in real life?
Yes, that's verified.
Moving to the next message, again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And would you read the date of this message into the record?
This is also July 21st of 2019.
And this is a continuation of the James and Elena story being written.
Yes.
Are you aware of which time period this message is referencing?
This is referencing a specific date of November 16th, 2019, or excuse me, 2018.
And was there something about this particular part of the story that drew your attention?
There were multiple things that drew my attention to this that I believe are pertinent to the investigation.
Can we go through those one by one?
Sure.
What is the first one that drew your attention?
So the first is that Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow went to an LDS temple that has been verified. They attended the temple in Gilbert, Arizona on November 16th of 2018 together. And that they then participated in a ceremony that is a proxy ceremony for marrying people who have already been deceased.
And again, that was verified that they were at that temple together.
Yes.
And they reference the proceeding. After that, there's an indication in here, if you can read from the James and Elena knew.
James and Elena knew that they were now sealed as husband and wife for eternity.
Did that line stick out to you?
Yes, this is Chad Daybell's writing stating that when he and Lori participated in this proxy ceremony, that somehow through that, they had become once again married for eternity.
And then if we go to the last sentence, starting with "they knew," would you read that into the record?
Yes. They knew they had just begun a new journey together that was eternal and never ending.
Was there something about that particular line that caught your attention?
Yes, this is the beginning of their relationship and continuation of that relationship in the coming months that encapsulate the time period of this investigation and the crimes that are alleged.
And if we go to the next slide, again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And these messages were also exchanged on July 21st of 2019, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And in looking at these messages, were there things that caught your attention?
Yes, two things primarily.
And can you walk us through those?
Yes. The first is that Lori Vallow responds to those prior clips that Chad wrote about James and Elena, saying, "It's making me so happy to read about our life," which is a verification that this is an autobiographical or factual account.
And then what is the next thing?
The next is the line from Lori Vallow to Chad Daybell, which says, "I love you more than ever. I can't wait to be with you forever. I'm begging father and mother. That's my job tonight." To which Chad Daybell responds, "I will be right beside you, begging just as much. I need you desperately."
And what, if anything, did that indicate to you about Chad and Lori's relationship?
That they had a clear plan to be with each other, to be together forever, and that they were both begging God for that to happen.
And again, when these messages are being exchanged, is Tammy Daybell still alive?
She is.
In your review of these iCloud accounts, was there ever any indication of Chad planning on getting a divorce?
None.
Ever any indication of Chad planning on getting separated?
No.
Moving to the next slide, and again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And could you please read the date of these messages into the record?
July 22nd of 2019.
You just talked about the previous slide indicating a plan to be together.
Correct.
What is it about these particular messages that stood out to you?
Again, there are a couple of different things that stood out as relevant. The first is the text from Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow referencing going to see a movie with Garth, who is his son. He then says, missing you desperately, but so excited to be with you. If you'll recall from a prior slide, there's a plan July 24th through the 26th for Chad and Lori to be meeting in person. And so the first line is a reference to their in-person meeting that's coming up.
And then looking at Lori's response, is there something in there that drew your attention?
Very much. She said, I love you. You will enjoy the scenery. Looks like Kauai a lot. And then responds with another text saying, hopefully we will be there someday soon together.
So there's a reference to Kauai.
Yes.
Do you know where Kauai is located?
Yes, it's in Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands.
What's Chad's response to that?
Chad's response is significant. He says, that is the plan, exclamation point, and my greatest desire.
And then we talked about Kauai being in Hawaii. Looking at Chad's final sentence there of the last message, could you read that into the record?
Yes. I look forward to being on a tropical island with you.
I asked you earlier if you knew when Chad and Lori got married. Do you recall when that was?
November 5th of 2019.
Do you know where they got married?
I do.
Where was that?
Kauai.
Do you know where Chad and Lori relocated eventually after getting married?
Kauai.
During the time those messages are being exchanged, was JJ Vallow still alive?
He was.
Was Tylee Ryan still alive?
She was.
Was Tammy Daybell still alive?
Yes, she was.
Moving to the next slide. Again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, can you read the date these messages were sent into the record?
July 26th of 2019.
Looking at these messages, did certain parts of them catch your attention?
Very much so, yes.
And what is it about them that caught your attention, if you can walk us through that?
Well, the time frame is important. So these messages were sent as Chad Daybell was returning home from having spent 2 or 3 days from the 24th through the 26th with Lori Vallow. So he references that he's just gotten home, back to his home in Rexburg, and that he had a splendid time with her. And then he follows up with a narrative or sentiment that he believes or feels that he's a grown-up version of Harry Potter who has to live with the Dudleys in a little space under the stairs. And then every few weeks he gets to escape and have amazing adventures with his goddess lover. The part that to me is most significant is the final sentiment where he says, then I have to return to my place under the stairs, feeling trapped. But I sense permanent freedom is coming, exclamation point.
And you indicated he just returned from the weekend or from the time with Lori, correct?
Yes, these messages were sent upon his return back to his home in Rexburg.
So he's referencing being back home with his family. He feels trapped.
Correct.
Looking at the next slide, and again, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to read. And Agent Hart, if you can read the date these messages were sent into the record.
July 28th of 2019.
What about these messages stood out to you?
There's a couple of things. This is in reference, just for context, to a trip that Lori Vallow was planning to take with Melanie Boudreau and Alex Cox to Southern California.
And in these, we see a message from Chad to Lori about no privacy here to hardly text. Do you happen to know where Chad would have been located at that time?
Judge objection foundation.
Sustain.
With these messages, was there any through your investigation, was there any indication that Chad Daybell was going on a trip?
No,
The indication was Lori Vallow was going on a trip.
correct.
So based on your investigation, Chad wasn't leaving his home.
Correct.
Judge objection. This is leading.
Well, it was, but it's already been asked and answered.
Then we see, looking at that third message on there, the text from Lori to Chad, is there something about that that drew your attention?
Yes, this is approximately 2 weeks after Lori Vallow's husband, Charles Vallow, has been killed. She is now free from her marriage. Chad Daybell is not free from his marriage. And she says, I need a distraction while I'm waiting for you. And he replies, absolutely, I think you'll have a fun time.
And turning to the next slide, I'm going to pause to allow the jurors to look at these. And
Council, could I have a quick sidebar? All right, thank you, counsel. That last exhibit, I'll ask if the state would redact certain information off of that, and I'll permit time to do that. In addition, the court had previously discussed with counsel our scheduling for today, given that it's Friday and we've been through a long week. I'm going to suggest we break for the day. We have advised the jurors previously we might be stopping early today. Ms. Blake, is this a good time for us to break until Monday?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Any objections from the defense?
No objection, Judge. Thank you.
All right, that will conclude evidence for this week. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this time, I do want to again admonish you, especially over this long weekend. Please do not discuss the evidence you've heard here with anyone else, including amongst yourselves. You can only do that after deliberations begin. Please don't follow the case or investigate the case in any way so that you can remain objective and decide this case only on the facts and evidence you've seen here in court. With that admonishment then, thank you so much for your attentiveness this week. We will commence again 8:30 Monday with additional evidence in the state's case in chief. With that in mind, then we'll go ahead and conclude for the week.
All right, please.